Welcome to this roundtable event with Washington Governor Jay Inslee. We are streaming live from Council Bluffs, Iowa. Tonight's event, we will be discussing issues of economic insecurity and climate change. My name is Scott Putney, and I'm a local activist here in Pottawatomie County in Council Bluffs, and it's my pleasure to introduce Washington Governor Jay Inslee.
All right, thanks a lot, appreciate it. Thanks for a chance to say hello from Council Bluffs. My name is Jay Inslee, and I just want to share something with you right off the top. It is my full total intention to make Donald Trump a blip in history, and I just wanted you to know that when we started our conversation. So I'm glad I have one person I agree with here. So.
Oh, we got to get him out.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I look forward to this discussion. We just had a great meeting with Pottawatomie Democrats. Scott, thanks for your leadership. It was a very vigorous group. We had a good discussion, and I'm looking forward to this discussion. I thought I'd make a couple comments today, and compelling, disturbing, and inspiring. Disturbing because we saw a town that's been there since 1858 that has been, not destroyed, but the heart of the utilities have been damaged, and so many houses are in a position that they may not be able to be rehabilitated. I met a friend named John Davis who worked with Al Gore one time, and he works on a lot of climate change issues, who lives there, and he had to move his 90-year-old mother to another spot with all the trauma that involves. That they'd been there for 4 generations. And to think of a town that's been there since 1858 that has never seen a flood like this before. Now you've seen this flood that's several feet higher than they've ever seen before is really disturbing. But I also saw a lot of inspiration. The people who were volunteers in the gym, these people came from all over just to pitch in to help their neighbors. And so from Hamburg, there's both a disturbing message that floods that are going to be made worse by climate change are something that we have to be very concerned about. But we also have courage coming from Iowa that people pull together and when times are tough and work together. And I think that's what we need to do nationally. We need to pull together to stop the climate change that is a greater threat of these incredibly huge floods that are now bedeviling us. So I'm running for president. I am the candidate, and I'm the only candidate who is saying something very clear and forthright, and that is that if I'm given this high honor, I will make defeating climate change the single #1 priority of the United States. And I believe it has to be the first, foremost, and paramount duty of the next president to do this. And the reason I say that is that we are out of time. There is just no more time. We have to get on top of this in the next presidency, or our goose is cooked. And our grandchildren are going to have a very degraded life. So I have committed myself to this body and soul, in part because I have 3 grandchildren, and I am dedicated to not leaving them a degraded life. And I believe we can do this and grow jobs by the millions, putting people to work building wind turbines. We got a labor leader here building wind turbines. We got people building electric cars in Michigan, great American workers. We got people building batteries in Nevada. This is a job-creating opportunity for us, and I'm the candidate who said I will focus on this. I know we're going to talk about a lot of other things, but if we don't solve this problem, we won't be able to solve the other problems, #1. And #2, this is our only chance to get this job done right now. So I am very appreciative of what you're doing here in this county to choose a president who's going to defeat climate change and rally this nation, just like another Democrat did, John F. Kennedy, who said we're going to the moon in 10 years. We know how to do big things in this country. If we get a president who's willing to be optimistic, and I'm an optimistic governor from the state of Washington that's been very successful, that's helped create the best economy in the United States. So I'm looking forward to how we reduce income inequality and save ourselves from climate change. Looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take our first question.
Hello, I'm Tonda Haddon. I'm from Council Bluffs, and I'm an environmental activist. And as a great-grandmother, I'm concerned about climate change. That'll affect my family. And also, I want to know how you can prevent negative impacts on climate change.
Big question. First, I thank you for your leadership. I'm married to a grandmother for 46 years now, and I respect grandmas because they're sticking up for our kids. And I have my three grandchildren have been officially designated the cutest grandkids in the state of Washington by executive order, and I'm sure yours are in Iowa as well. Look, this is a huge economic opportunity for us. We're going to talk about how we create jobs here, but it is such a moral obligation. And when I thought about running, I think probably the way you do. I really love being governor. I've been one of the more successful governors. We got a great state, good things are happening. But I just said, look, I couldn't look my grandkids in the eyes on my last days if I didn't do everything possible to fight climate change and give them a chance. So I know we need a president that can ignite the inherent optimism of this nation. And I'm an optimist I believe, who can do that. So I think we share a bond here. And whatever you're doing, keep doing it, because we need leadership at a local level that is so important and so inspiring. And fortunately, we have that inspiration. I marched with the students in the climate strike in New York a few weeks ago, and it was very inspiring. Thousands of young, teenagers on strike because they want to defeat climate change. And we marched past Trump Tower. They were holding up, there's no planet B, and Donald Trump, let me breathe. That was inspiring. So thank you for your leadership. Now, what we can do, because we know, unfortunately, there's kind of some climate change locked into the system because we haven't moved in 30 or 40 years like we should. So we do have to do things to increase our resilience in a number of ways. We've got a plan on how we do management of water and river systems when we have these huge precipitation events. Extreme precipitation events have increased 40% in the Midwest in the last 60 years, and they are probably going to increase another 30% at least in the upcoming decades. So we have to be able to plan for these changes that are sort of locked in because of the carbon we've already put into the atmosphere, because previous presidents didn't get the job done. So, and it's unfortunate because Trump has told his agencies, no, don't plan on that. This is a Chinese hoax. It'll go away. And by the way, he's wrong. Wind turbines don't cause cancer, they cause jobs. They cause jobs for laborers and carpenters and machinists and sheet metal workers, and we're the party who gets that. So I look forward to working with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Governor Inslee, today I stand before you as an American, as a Nebraskan, as a neighbor to these Iowans, but also a member of an indigenous Crimean Tatar nation whose people are actively suffering oppression under a continued illegal occupation by the Russian Federation since March of 2014. As such, I offer you a heartfelt greeting of peace, Salam Lar. Being indigenous to lands outside of the Western Hemisphere, I would like to do a land acknowledgement of these lands of so-called Council Bluffs, Iowa, to the Omaha people who reside along these riverbanks, as well as up further, the Ponca Nation, and a bit further yet, the Isanti, Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota relatives. Now that I'll explain why I've offered the above information and how is it related to our righteous struggle against climate change. Through a strong sense of indigenous solidarity with our relatives here on Turtle Island, and being active within the environmental movement, having met many of the world's leading authorities on the matter, including Iowa's own James E. Hansen, a NASA scientist at one time. I often struggle with a great sense of cognitive dissonance between the science it's telling us that the nation's leaders and policy positions are affording us as citizens. We had beat back KXL in Nebraska, and then came Energy Transfer's Dakota Access Pipeline. It came here right across the entire state in a diagonal fashion, from the Missouri to the Mississippi. In short, it would risk the water source of 16+ million people downstream, and a bit further up north, it seemed further to sustain awful reality of environmental racism, this time perpetrated against the indigenous relatives of the Lakota at Standing Rock. Rather than sit around in despair, I decided to move to action. In my case, that meant engaging in long-standing American tradition of civil disobedience, what many would say birthed this nation. I say that also labor has contributed to this and afforded us many protections. Women have engaged in civil disobedience to get the right to vote. And we do know the famous movement led by Martin Luther King and others, Malcolm X, another famous Nebraskan, the civil rights movement. I stand with a long-standing tradition of NVDA, and It is not a decision that any of us take lightly. We don't move to it without thinking cautiously and trying everything else. Nobody wants to get arrested. Rather, if in the face of unprecedented collusion between the state and the private for-profit fossil fuels industry, we are made to do exceptional things in these exceptional times of unprecedented climate change. I was told once by a magistrate here in the state of Iowa during a jury trial after having been arrested, Nebraska, you really don't have a dog in this fight here, do you? I replied, I absolutely do. I live in Omaha. Our drinking water comes from the Missouri. Somehow it was hard to convince some folks that the environment did not end at the state line, and that in the end of this chapter, we did see anti-discrimination legislation passed here in the state of Iowa. Now, as we observe unprecedented political posturing, extraordinary maneuvering to approve the KXL project by both the President Donald Trump, issuing not just one executive order, but then issuing another in an apparent attempt to circumvent a district court injunction out of Montana. This pipeline was rejected by the Obama administration as not being good for the country. Again, communities impacted would most be indigenous, the Lakota. Beyond the obvious concerns for the water and environment, amidst this era of unprecedented climate change, the Lakota are fearful that the resource extractive sufferings and societal ills in the case of going on of missing and murdered indigenous women.
Sorry to interrupt, but could we please get to a question and
All right.
move it along?
Basically what we have seen is we've seen posturing by Governor Kristi Noem. We've seen SB 189 and 190 put through, making a First Amendment ability of freedom of speech and freedom of assembly illegal. We'd be charged as terrorists for threatening critical infrastructure. And this is preventing the participation of the public in standing up in these times of climate change. So I ask to you, when we see legislation being passed in the state of Iowa, when we see legislation being passed in the state of South Dakota to ram these projects through and to silence our freedom of speech and dissent, our rights under the Constitution, how should we stand up to these interests?
By electing me President of the United States, because I'm allied with you on so many of these issues, and there's a lot packed into your question. I'll try to address most of them. Number one, I just want to tell you how important indigenous peoples are in our effort to give all of us, indigenous and non-indigenous, a chance for our kids to live in a healthy existence in more generations. In my state, we have many tribes who now I have been allied with, trying to pass legislation with some success to build a clean energy economy. Right now, for instance, the tribes are supporting an effort to have 100% clean electricity. It really is necessary for us to wean ourselves off of coal-based electricity in the decades to come. And our tribes have been super advocates for that, and I've worked with them big time on this, as I have on so many environmental issues, and recovering our salmon species, for instance, on recovering our orcas, on protecting our clean water. And you know, our clean water is threatened right now because 2 days ago, Donald Trump wanted to repeal or inhibit our ability to use the clean water law to give us clean water across our states. So I thank the indigenous people across the United States for the work that they have done. And as far as our ability to speak, we have to maintain the ability to speak in this United States. And civil disobedience, appropriately done, where there is not violence, has been a successful thing for positive change throughout American history. And as you noted, we were born in that tradition to some degree, and we've continued to see progress in this degree. Look, we've seen things now, more people are talking about climate change because the Sunrise Movement has been active in trying to bring this effort up. So I look forward to getting these jobs done.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Richard Haddon. I'm a lifelong resident of Council Bluffs, Iowa, and very proud of it. I got a question about solar power. Now, I'm kind of old, so in the 1980s and 70s, they were really pushing conservation, insulate your homes, double paned windows,
Right.
and all that. Smaller cars. I drive a PT Cruiser because that kind of was ingrained in me. Now all of a sudden, and now we've been developing wind power and solar power. Now it seems like there's almost a war against solar power by big energy. Mid-America Energy is trying to get a bill passed where people with solar panels pay them for the electricity they generate. Nevada has the same law, and so does Florida. Now, if you're elected president, what are you going to do to put a stop to this? And why are you going to be pushing for alternate energies?
Well, listen, I appreciate it. I'm going to be pushing for every technology that can reduce carbon emissions, that can help Americans live a healthy life. And the good news is we are rich in these new abundant energy sources. Start with solar energy. So I wrote a book about this. By the way, this is not a new thing to me. I've been working on this for 20 years. I ran for Congress in 1992 saying we did fight carbon pollution. So I've been at this for a long time. I wrote a book, co-authored a book in 2007 saying how a clean energy future would grow our economy. And I sort of had a vision statement that we would have much more cost-effective technologies in a whole host of systems. And I predicted that the cost of solar power would come down. It has come down 80% since I wrote that book. The cost of wind energy has come down 20% and still dropping since I wrote that book. And by the way, Donald Trump is wrong. As you know, wind turbines don't cause cancer, they cause jobs. And that's what they're making is jobs. We know that biofuels has a bright future, I believe, and particularly with new technologies. We have a biorefinery in Washington that is going to use Iowa feedstock to make biofuels in our state. We know that energy efficiency is important. Look, almost every building in America could take some help putting good carpenters and laborers to work in one of the most massive employment construction projects in American history. So we're going to have robust growth in our economy around these systems. And by the way, there are Americans doing this work. I got into it with Meghan McCain on The View a few weeks ago. And she was saying about how we Democrats were going to take away people's trains and planes and cars. And I said, well, you know, that's funny you bring that up, because this morning the governor of Washington has a shiny blue General Motor all-electric Bolt charging in his driveway, in my driveway, made by American workers in Orion, Michigan. And you can use your electric car driven by solar power or wind power or biofuels that generate electricity in some sense. This is a vision that we are capable of achieving in America if, in fact, we give consumers rights to make decisions on what technology they use, if we do the research and development, and if we do what we've done in my state. We've built a $6 billion wind turbine industry. Yesterday, I'm happy that my legislature passed my bill to have 100% clean energy in our grid, so we'll have no fossil fuels polluting, perfectly clean electricity, driving a perfectly clean electric car, using solar power that you don't get abused from the utility on. That's a sweet vision, and I hope you and I can live long enough to see it, and we are right now.
I really do.
All right, thank you. Next question.
Governor, my name is Brian. I'm from Sidney, Iowa, Fremont County.
Yeah.
So just 8 miles up the road from
All
where
right.
you were at today. So first off, thank you very much for coming to the county and seeing what we're going through right now.
You're not done going through it.
No, we're not. There's a lot of
Yep.
there's a lot of work ahead.
Yeah.
My question is, as a small business owner and as someone that comes from a farm family, we've been in the county since 1879.
Wow.
When we talk about climate change, the folks in my part of the country are not willing to get it started because we don't feel like we have a seat at the table. And so we're talking about climate change and how we're going to be able to create a safer and cleaner environment. Where does production agriculture come into that? Because the community that you were at today is totally consumed. I mean, how it succeeds is
Right.
by production agriculture.
Right.
How our county succeeds
Right.
is by that.
Yeah.
And I can tell you right now, as somebody who has a lot of farm clients, they're very skeptic of
Yeah.
right now.
What do you do?
I'm a health insurance broker.
Great. Yeah.
So, you know, right now I have clients that are sitting across the table and they're renewing health insurance policies
Yeah.
for $3,000 or $4,000 a month when their farm ground is underwater. It's
Yeah.
out of production for a year, maybe out of production for 2 to 3 years. So where is the bargaining chip on that, and how can we bring production agriculture and environmental activists together and
Yeah.
try to compromise and bring an agreement?
Well, the first thing I'd say is production agriculture is just really close to my heart and being, in part because I was first elected to office from the Yakima Valley. This is one of the best apple growing and hop growing and pear and peach growing places in the world. Very labor intensive agriculture. And I raised 4 acres of alfalfa. That doesn't make me a big agribusiness person at all. But I was surrounded by people whose livelihood was in agriculture. They were my clients and friends. And I have a feeling, frankly, for Iowa because of that. I sort of think of Red Oak, Iowa as, Yakima East. It's a very similar setting of production agriculture. And I think that has set me up well to do with these issues because I've dealt with irrigation issues extensively, trade issues, and we know the trade issues have been so problematic, what Trump has done to create the chaos in these markets. And and that's what, I've strayed a little bit from your question, but I got to mention this because it really ticks me off. We had a president who had such a chaotic trade policy that now you don't have a market for your grain. So you put it in your silo, and then a big flood comes and knocks your silo down. I saw a whole bunch of grain laying around that cannot be sold now.
Which, by the way, is not covered under insurance.
Which is not covered by insurance, by floods that Donald Trump says don't exist because he says climate change doesn't exist. This is maddening to me. So I am eager to get in or work with production agriculture to work on these issues. Now I think production agriculture can be this is a winner for production agriculture for 2 reasons. Number one, the damage they're suffering is astronomical. We're looking at maybe $1 billion of agricultural losses potentially in the Midwest. They are some of the first victims of climate change. From the flooding and the changing growing seasons and the like, the lack of irrigation. If you look west to Napa Valley, they got some good wine now, but 50 years from now, you're going to be able to grow wine there? We don't know. Or grow grapes there? So number one, they are the first victims. But second, they can be a very winners from a revenue standpoint someday, I believe, both through the biofuels industry, which can be a significant component of this new clean energy system, and someday generating revenue by sequestering carbon in the topsoil. If we can get a way for farmers to have a revenue source by sequestering carbon in topsoil, getting it out of the atmosphere, putting it in the topsoil, that could be a sweet thing for the agricultural community. So I feel really good about my ability to work with this community that has been so instrumental. And it is a high-tech industry. This is something a lot of people who have not been associated with ag like I have, they don't understand. This is a high-tech operation. And I recognize that. And frankly, that's one of the most exciting things in my state that's going on, or having new technological systems from how you process food to how you grow it to your irrigation systems. I get excited about high tech. So I look forward to getting free advice from you too.
All right, thank you. Linda, you want the next question?
Sure. Hi, Governor.
Hi, good to see you again.
Yes, nice to see you. My name is Linda, and I live here in Council Bluffs. For 37 years, I was an elementary classroom teacher. So I'm going to kind of shift here and ask about education. We've got students graduating from our 4-year institutions with a heavy debt load.
Yeah.
How can we help these students? Maybe cut part of that, maybe community service. You talked earlier in a small group about being a part of starting AmeriCorps, if it was a paid, community service for these kids. And then a second question is, as these kids graduate from college, many of them can't get jobs. And so, we have a wonderful community college system throughout Iowa, tooling, retooling workers. How do we get more? We need help in getting more people to go into the trades.
Well, as we talked about earlier at our Democratic meeting, education is what got me first involved in public life. My wife and I passed the school bond on the 7th try. I'm the son of a biology teacher and a coach, and I know the power of education and educators. And the reason I know about the power of that is that when I go around the state of Washington, I meet people all the time who are 70 years old, and they say, was your father Franklin? And they said, well, Garfield or something. And they tell me what an impact my dad made on their lives to have a good educator in the classroom. So I have been involved now for over 25 years in and out of public life, trying to help educators be in a better position to do that. We've done that by huge expansions of early child education, a big expansion of financial aid, because we know the debt burden that our students now have. So we have one of the most robust student aid plans in the United States, because we want to make sure that every student can have an education. So we have targeted particularly lower income students with a huge wraparound service so they can really afford college. And one of the things I'm most proud of is that I want to keep good teachers in the classroom. I don't want them all go to work for Amazon or Microsoft. So I'm really proud this year I want to average 12% increase for teachers. And I'm proud of that because they need it, they deserve it. We want to keep talent in the classroom. So that's very, very important to me. Going forward federally, one of the things we can do is make sure that DeVos is not close to anything having to do with schools ever again, so that she won't take funding away from Special Olympics, and so that we can increase our support for special education. This is close to my wife's heart and mind. We have a special ed student in our family, and we know there's a lot more work to do in this regard. Now, there's a whole host of other things we need to do around classroom size, around new avenues of education. I think one of the mistakes we've made in the last several decades is telling our children that if they don't get a four-year degree, they're going to be a failure. I really think that's a mistake, because there's multiple careers that are very, very good that if we can get students to be exposed to early in life, they can go into. So we're starting a program called Career Connect Washington to create a whole new avenue of career readiness that's somewhat modeled on Switzerland, where 70% of the teenagers are in paid apprenticeships. And as a result, they have almost no unemployment. And they love it because they understand a career at age 16, 17, and 18. And if they want to, they go to college later on, but they got access to a career. The labor community has absolutely been fantastic in developing these apprenticeships. We want to broaden that. We've had our first computer coding apprenticeship and our first healthcare apprenticeship recently. So we've got big plans for education. I want to thank you for your career. People are going to talk about you 20 years from now, just like they talk about my dad.
Thank you.
If I could, just with the follow-up, could you be a little more specific on your plan to relieve student debt?
Yes.
Because, the candidates we have there's a wide spectrum of
Right.
what they would do.
Right. Well, one thing about student debt that I'll mention, and it's perhaps more of a state issue, but I want to talk about it because it's important. One of the reasons student debt has gone up is that states have reduced their support in their budgets for the operational budgets of the colleges. So the colleges had to turn around and put the debt burden on our students, rather than the states that have historically supported the college systems. And this has happened, unfortunately, in my state too, in some degree. And that is why, if you go to my state today, the colleges will tell you that my budget is maybe one of the best ones in a long, long time. So we can relieve the burden on students and put it on the state government where it more belongs by supporting the operational budgets. Now, the federal government can help in this way in a whole bunch of different ways as well. One is by providing more research and development funds for our universities, particularly in clean energy, where we can have our universities developing these new clean energies. I've started a clean energy fund, for instance, that has now spun off a number of clean energy companies that are putting people to work. Now, on the federal side, I also believe that we have to have a more robust federal involvement in student financing to reduce this debt burden. And I would suggest that the Washington model is the best way to sort of create that type of policy. Because instead of just having butter, where you just kind of give everybody the same thing, so that the millionaire's child and the child of poverty, they get the same thing. That doesn't really make sense to me, because the child of poverty then can't afford to go to school. So if you only give free tuition to a child coming out of poverty, they can't afford college. So what we've done is we've done a much more robust, much more, not expensive, but a much better package so that these lower income people can actually afford college. And I think that ought to be the model to make sure everybody can afford college in this country.
Thank you. Next
Governor.
question.
Hi.
My name's Jeff Shudak. I'm a labor activist right here from Council Bluffs, Iowa. Welcome.
That's the best hat I've seen in Iowa so far. So.
It's a nice one, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm a little envious.
All right. Got a real easy question for you. The same question I ask every candidate that I get to meet. What are your ideas to help make the labor movement and organized labor relevant again? What will you specifically do to help this occur?
Well, I would do what I'm doing as governor, because I believe talk is one thing and action is another. What we're doing in Washington is to, for instance, push back against the Janus decision to make sure that public employees get an access to real collective bargaining units. And I'm happy to tell you that since the Janus decision, because I have worked with organized labor, we have been able to increase our participation 10% in labor unions in my state since that. And that's because I've worked with labor leaders in a way to make sure people continue to have organizational rights. Number two, on a federal level, we have to rebuild the ability for people to make their decision whether or not to have an organized unit or not. That system is totally broken right now because when people go to organize, they still have to live under fear of being fired. They still have to live in fear that they're going to be degraded on the next schedule that comes out. We have to give them the dignity to make their own decision. And one of the ways to do that is through a card check system, where if we have people sign cards and they want a labor union, they can darn well get it. And that ought to be the law of the United States. But we don't need to stop, we can't stop there. We need to rebuild the NLRB system, which right now is totally dysfunctional. Look, if you try to form a union now, and I'll tell you why I feel passionate about this. When I was in college, I drove a concrete truck, one of the many jobs I had working my way through college. And we were in a lunchroom one day, and these folks started talking about forming a union, because they were kind of getting the short end of the stick. And they were talking about it for a while, and then this fellow over in the corner, he was an old guy, he was probably 50, at the time. And he just said, no, I will have absolutely nothing to do with this, and I don't even want to hear the word union. And people asked him why, and he said, because I'm afraid I'm going to be fired, my kids need a paycheck. And he was afraid. And when you're a 22-year-old person and you see a 50-year-old person that fear, no one should have to have that feeling in this country. And we got to make sure that union people or people who want a union can actually get one. So I'm dedicated to that. Now there's a whole host of other issues on policy where we can support the union movement, which aren't necessarily the union movement itself. I'll give you an example. We believe that working people ought to be able to have a family life as well. So I'm proud to say that as governor, we have implemented the best family medical leave policies in the United States. I just met a woman at our Democratic meeting over here next door whose son was he worked at Mount Rainier National Park, and he was able to take care of his ailing father because of our bill. She came up to me and thanked me for that. We have created the highest minimum wage in the United States, tied now with one other state. We've developed the best gender pay equity laws in the United States. We're very radical in Washington. We think women should get paid the same as men. So I know that's a radical proposition. But we created a law that won't allow the boss to hide the fact that he's paying men more than women now. We think this is going to be very, very effective. So we have embraced a whole host of measures that will really support working people. I will just share one more example with you. I'm kind of a conviction politician. I follow my convictions rather than the polling. So I voted against the Iraq War, even though it was very popular at the time. I voted against the repeal of Glass-Steagall, even though the financial service industry was trying to, shove it through. And one of my very first votes, I was a young legislator in Yakima, very Republican area, very agricultural area. And this bill came up that would give unemployment compensation to farm workers. Now, the vast majority of farm workers were Hispanic. Most of them were not eligible to vote at the time. We want to solve that problem with comprehensive immigration reform. And people said that, no, I couldn't do that politically because people would get mad about it. It was just too radical a thought. And I said, are you crazy? These are the hardest working people in the country. And we're not going to give them a right that every other worker has? So I voted for it. And people didn't think I could survive re-election. I happened to have survived. And I feel very strongly about working people. They deserve dignity.
Thank you.
Still like your hat, too.
Thank you. Next question? Yeah, sure.
Thank you, Governor, for
Yeah.
being here. I appreciate you taking the time to have this discussion. My name's Ron Kaminsky. At our facility, we represent workers in the entire state of Nebraska and the western third of Iowa. Nebraska, and all that training happened to instruct and train workers how to build wind turbines. So when you had those wind turbines, most of those wind turbines are built by folks that are trained at our facility from western Iowa and from Nebraska. When we had a recession in Nebraska, I was labeled a person that didn't care about the environment, even though I've pushed for all these types of things, for training, for building wind turbines, for working with Mid-America. I was labeled somebody that didn't care about the environment based on the fact that we had a contract with the company that was trying to build a pipeline through the state of Nebraska. Okay. The reason why we stood up for that project is because we were in the middle of recession. We had people losing homes, losing their cars, losing their families, right? Because they couldn't afford to put food on the table. I have, and I'm glad we're having this discussion, because the fact is we as a party, as the Democratic Party, have to figure out a way where we don't label each other within our party an enemy, because we all believe mostly in the same things. The question is how we get there. The thing that I don't hear any Democratic candidate talking about is how you help those workers that may be in that field of work, that are working at the Mid-America coal-fired power plant in Council Bluffs, that are getting paid $100,000 a year, right? For them to say, oh, I'm okay with losing my job to go flip burgers for $10 an hour, right? How do we get these companies that believe in alternative energies, that build these type of projects, to say we should do this the right way, we should build 100% union? That would help solve this whole problem and this whole fight within our party about if a union cares about the environment or they don't. Most unions care about the environment, but they also represent workers that make good wages in those fields, and they have to stand up for those workers, right? So how do we get those folks in that line of work to do it the right way?
Well, first off, you said something that was really telling to me when you said we don't want to call each other names and ascribe motivations. That's really important. I appreciate you saying that. And I really very much agree to that. Because look, you know, we're going to have to transition over several decades to a cleaner economy. We all know that. Everybody in this room knows that. And we're going to have tensions and debates while we go through that transition period, right? And it's not black or white. It's shades of gray and gradients and how fast we do things. And so it's just really important to listen to one another to come up with a consensus. That's number one. I appreciate you saying that. But as to the ability to make sure that these new jobs are family wage jobs, we've got to do the kind of things that we're doing here, project labor agreements. So in our Department of Transportation projects now, we require project labor agreements. And we ought to think about the same things we do when we make federal investments in federal projects for clean energy. Prevailing wages. I have one of the best provisions now to protect prevailing wages, to make sure that we actually pay real prevailing wages in these jobs. Thank you for that. Overtime rules. We are shortly going to announce the best overtime rules, probably in the United States, so that, you know, people can actually have meaningful wages and not be forced to work overtime and not get real overtime like it is meant to be. And as you know, it's gone down dramatically compared to when overtime rules were implemented. The whole card check issue of giving more people the ability to really form a union is extremely important, and I think that that's important as well. But there will be some times where you are some transitioning. At some point, coal is some point going to transition largely out of the system, because scientifically that's just a requirement. But we have to make sure that during that transition period we have a just transition, not just a transition. That means everybody has to be treated with justice. So if you do have people in the coal-fired industry, we ought to do what we've done in our state. So we have one coal-fired plant, and we've reached an agreement after a lot of discussion with respect of everybody at the table to close the plant over a several-year period. But as part of that, we've created a $55 million fund that's going to provide all kinds of training for people that do want to keep working. Now, some people are going to retire by the time it shuts down. Dollars to help the local community and small businesses, ramp up small businesses to create more employment opportunities. Money to help the community and infrastructure. And that's the kind of thing we need to do. And it's been a very successful enterprise. And then in our, like I said, we had this 100% bill, so we're going to have 100% clean electricity in our state. In that bill, we put a provision that low-income people would get a break on their utility bills so that they would be protected from costs as well. Because these marginalized communities, low-income communities, frequently communities of color, who are often the first victims of climate change, they need to protect it, because we got to use this transition at the same time we save our environment to reduce income inequality, which is a massive problem in our society. And I believe we can do that if we work together.
One follow-up question, if that's all right. I would like to say that Mid-America, their coal-fired plant is getting converted over to natural gas.
Yeah.
That's a lot of that's happening here
Yeah.
in the Midwest,
Yeah.
which is positive. Do you, what do you think about, for example, and this is an issue that we have lengthy debates on within our organization, especially at our union hall. How do you replace or upgrade the current infrastructure when it comes to natural gas, when it comes to oil pipelines?
Yeah.
How do you do that? Because right now, it seems near to impossible to do that. And my concern is I'd rather replace a pipeline that is 50 or 60 years old than to not do anything about it at all. I think that's worse for the environment.
Yeah, I don't think, I appreciate your question. I don't think there's a black or white answer to it. What I would say is, I think we have to be very cautious about locking ourselves into infrastructure that might go 50, 60, 70 years, because we know we have to be in essentially a decarbonized economy in the next several decades. So I do think you have to be cautious. You don't want to lock in an investment that's going to live a lot longer than you know. We just really can't be using fossil fuels. So that's one of the things you have to be very cautious about. But we're not, shutting off the oil pump today. And that's in no one's intention. And then I just think we have very both intentional and optimistic about all the jobs that we are going to be created. Your folks are putting up wind turbines. They're building a plant. We're the largest manufacturer of carbon fiber that goes into electric cars in the Western Hemisphere, Moses Lake, Washington. We got plumbers and carpenters and laborers working on it, when that thing was built. The biorefinery, we're trying to double its capacity in Grays Harbor right now. Same thing, iron workers, machinists. We just got a lot of these jobs. Right now, jobs in clean energy are growing twice as fast as the average economy. We want those to be union jobs. And we got today in my state, $70 billion of transportation infrastructure that I got passed, even through a Republican Senate. And 70% of that is low carbon public transportation. And these are good union jobs, and we make sure that that's the case. So, I think we ought to be optimistic, and we ought to be smart, and we ought to do this together, and I believe we can do that.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks for your leadership.
Tasha, would you like the next question? And this will be our last question.
Okay. Hi, welcome, Governor. It's nice to meet you. My name is Tasha Holben. I am a letter carrier in Council Bluffs. I'm a mom. I'm a Meemaw. I'm an environmental activist. I remember getting my first Earth Day t-shirt more than 25 years ago in high school when I first learned about how important it was for our environment. And being a letter carrier with a lot of things, so the Postal Task Force, I could have a list of questions, but obviously I'm concerned with the pre-funding, with the postal issues and privatization, but that's not what's the question on my heart tonight. So. I'm really close with my family. I have an 8-year-old great-nephew named Jackson, and he has been battling brain cancer since birth, only they didn't know he had it. He's been fighting and he's been beating brain cancer, and they've done lots of different treatments and done a lot of travel and seen a lot of good doctors. But one thing that has tremendously helped with him is marijuana. His dad recently said he's like Pinocchio. He's actually starting to look like a real boy now, and that he lies a little. So I know it's medicinally and recreationally legal in Washington.
Right.
In your administration, is that something that you would like to be seen legal everywhere?
Yes, I think it's time for America to legalize marijuana, and I would recommend anyone with questions about that to come to my state, because we have found a way to be very successful in this. We have shown there hasn't been any real downside from a youth usage perspective. We haven't had mass criminality in the business. We've generated about $700 million that helps youth health costs and our schools. It's been very, very successful. And I think that Americans are way ahead of politicians on this. I think in the vast majority of communities in this country, people are ready for this because they're seeing the success in my state and some other states. I think we've done it best in my state because we've done it kind of smartly. And I've also, look at the drug war is something we got to look at. I'm the first governor to offer thousands of pardons to people who have been convicted of marijuana, because we got to end the racial disparity in our criminal justice system. And that's a start. We're going to eliminate the death penalty. I've put a moratorium on the death penalty. We're training our police officers in disengagement to reduce violence with the black community. So we're doing a lot of good things in our state, and I wish your nephew well. I'm glad he has you, and tell him we like Pinocchio and him. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. And for that, we'll call a wrap on the evening. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and have a good night.
Thank you. Thanks, friends. Appreciate it. Thanks, Scott. Thank you.